So we're going to start with Photoshop layers. I have some previous files that are open, and one trick that I really like in Photoshop is Photoshop's ability to close all the windows at once instead of going through and closing each and every window. So if we go into the File menu and we choose Close, which is Command W, you'll also see that we can close all by using our Option Command W, which is great. So even if you have files that have edits to them or have been changed, this feature works really well. So if I say Close All, it's going to go through and just close all my windows at once. I really like that feature. So what I want to do is talk about Photoshop layers. What are layers and why do we use them? So let's open up our layers files. We're going to build a layer sandwich, which is a really great way to represent how Photoshop works. When you're opening a file in Photoshop, you don't need to open just one file. You can open up several at a time, and I'm going to go under my layer sandwich file. I'm going to click on the first file, hold down my Shift key, and click on the last file, and open up all of these at once. It's going to open each and every file as its own separate tab, and a tab is going to be its own document. So these are all separate documents right here. And of course, Control Tab is going to allow me to tab through each open window to see which file I have. Now, the only panels that we need up are going to be our toolbar and our layers panel. So go into the window menu, call up your layers panel, and that's what we're going to need. Make sure you've got your options bar here. We're going to need that. Now with layers, what I want to do is I want to build this sandwich. So this is my reference right here, and this is what I want to do is I want to put all these together into multiple layers. Now, I'm going to start off with my plate tab. With my layers panel, I'd like to go in and begin to build my layer sandwich. So I'm going to go over to my bread slice. Now, the only tool that we're going to need in layers here is going to be our move tool, the letter V, right there. And I'm actually going to make my cursor larger so you can see this a little bit better, so that we can grab this. There we go. So the cursor's a little bit larger. Okay. When you're starting off here, move tool, the letter V, that's all you're going to need to go ahead and do everything that you want to with layers. Now, one thing with layers before we even get started here, I'm going to jump back to my plate. You'll notice that the plate has a white background in it. But when I go over to my bread slice, this has a checkerboard background. This checkerboard background indicates that the background has been removed. This checkerboard background doesn't print. That's just telling you that this is a transparent background, meaning there's no pixels in this area. We see just the bread. And what this allows us to do is be able to put things in front and behind this and still see what's going on with the bread. The plate with a white background, we're going to go ahead and deal with in a bit. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to begin to composite my image by having each and every individual file ready to go. Now what I want to do is I want to bring these layers into one of my existing images here, the plate, and I want to begin to build this layer sandwich. So I'm going to take my bread slice here, and there's multiple different ways to bring in a file from one Photoshop document to another. Okay, this is one of them. When I have all of my tabs up here, I'm going to take my move tool and I'm going to click and I'm going to move my bread around. One thing with the move tool, I'm going to go up here to my options bar, and one of the things that I want to do is turn off the auto select and also unchecked the show transform controls. We're going to show you what those do, but for now uncheck both of those because it can get a little bit confusing once we get a little bit further in here with what's going on with the transform controls and why something gets selected when we click on it. So uncheck both of those in the options bar. I'm going to click the bread, and when I move that, I'm moving my entire bread around the layer. In order to bring this into an existing document, I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to drag my layer all the way up to, and I'm going to touch my cursor to the tab in which I would like to drag the bread into. And I'm holding down my mouse key. Do not let go. If you let go now, absolutely nothing happens other than you get frustrated. Now I'm going to drag my cursor back down into my plate, and here I'm going to let go. So this is one way that I can bring in one file and drag it to another. Photoshop allows you to drag and drop from one open file to another. Now, because these are not side by side, I can't do that very easily, but this is one way that I can go through and do that. We're going to show you multiple ways to get files into other existing files. Once I go into my Layers panel, your layer thumbnails here may be a little bit small. So before we go any further, what we're going to do is we're going to set these thumbnails a little bit larger. And you can do this in one of two ways. You can go directly to the layer thumbnail, right-click on the layer thumbnail and choose Large Thumbnails. Or you can go to the Layers cheese grater, go down to the bottom and choose Panel Options. Open that up, and then go ahead and set your thumbnail size in the Layer Panel Options and click OK. Now, when we refer to the thumbnail, it's always the picture here in the Layers panel. And because this is Photoshop and things get a little bit intense and complicated sometimes, there's actually 4 different zones in the Layers panel. There's the visibility, there's the thumbnail, there's the name, and then there's the actual layer itself. And we're going to walk through all of those. So when I specifically say click on the layer thumbnail, it is just this right here. It's not this, it's not this, it's the actual thumbnail showing what's on that layer. Next, every layer that we move in here, I want to make sure I name. And the way you name a layer is hover over the layer name, double click to open up that field, type in the name, and hit return. Always name your layers. And I'm going to repeat that throughout all these videos. So my bread is now in my layer sandwich. So next, I'm going to come up to my lettuce. And let us put in the lettuce. So again, my move tool, it's the only tool that I need. I can click on my lettuce and move it all around. And now I want to bring it into my plate layer right here. Now, another way we can bring this in without going in and actually dragging it up to my plate here is a totally different way. I'm going to go over to my Layers panel here. I'm going to click on the cheese grater, and from here, I'm going to choose Duplicate. When I duplicate this layer, I don't need to duplicate the layer within the existing document. I can go to the Duplicate Layer window, and instead of duplicating it right in the same layer, I can basically say duplicate this, but have my document destination be my plate. So I'm duplicating this, just not in this document. So here, I'm going to go in, and I can actually name this beforehand if I want to so that it comes in and its names. So let us name that right there. I'm going to click OK. And now when I switch over to my plate, you'll notice that my lettuce has come in there and was duplicated right there, which is great. Okay? Different way of doing it. Next, I'm going to grab my tomato. If I go in and I grab my tomato, one of the interesting things that I could do is I could copy this layer. And if I copy this layer by going under Edit Copy right here, and then go over to my plate layer, and then hit Paste, you'll notice that I can copy a layer and then paste it right in. This is one of my favorite ways of doing it. Again, every time that you bring a layer in, always make sure you name your layer. And you're going to find out why very quickly, because we're going to end up with a lot of layers that get very confusing very quickly. So, several different ways that I can bring in different content into an existing file. I'm going to do the same thing with my onion as well. I'm actually going to copy this, go back to my plate, and I'm going to paste. And I'm going to put that in as well. Lastly, I'm going to grab my bacon. And this I can just simply click and drag it to my plate, and drag it in. Now you'll notice that the bacon was already named. The reason why this is because if I go back to my original bacon file, that layer was named, and that layer name comes in whenever you drag that into any other file. So this is my entire sandwich right here. Now, a good thing to do right now is to save this to make sure that you don't lose what you've done. So if I go into the File menu, I'm going to choose Save As. And when I save a file, I want to save this as a Photoshop file because I would like to retain all my layers. Whenever you're working on a file like this, the best way to save this is a Photoshop file with layers. Okay? Almost every other file type in here will not be able to save layers. JPEGs, no layers. PNGs, no layers. Okay? So always save it as a Photoshop file. And when you do, I'm going to call this my sandwich. Photoshop file.psd. The extension stands for Photoshop document. I'm going to click Save, and there's my layered file. All set and ready to go. Now, I'm going to enter into full screen mode here because I don't want to see all my tabs across the screen. So I'm going to hit the letter F, and you'll notice that my tabs disappear, and I have the ability to now move around my file a little bit more. I want to talk about just a few little things getting around my document really quick and easy. Zooming in and zooming out. We have the View menu here, and I can zoom in, zoom out, Command plus and Command minus, something that I use all the time. I can also go to my Zoom tool, which is a letter Z, and be able to zoom in on things. And I can go to my Hand tool, which is a letter H, and I can move things around as well. When we're in full screen mode here, this allows me to zoom bigger and smaller than the screen and move around freely wherever I want to without being inhibited by the actual frame of the screen itself. Keyboard shortcuts to be able to get into what it is that we're doing. If you ever need your Hand tool because you'd like to move something around, Spacebar is going to give you the Hand tool while you need it. Let go, goes back to the tool that you were using. The Zoom tool, of course, is the letter Z. And the Zoom tool, when you use this, let's go ahead and set these preferences. Here in the options bar with a zoom, we can go in and have a scrubby zoom. And scrubby zoom allows me to go ahead and, if I click on scrubby zoom, and you go to the left and to the right, this allows you to zoom in and zoom out very quickly. I'm not a huge fan of scrubby zoom because I used the zoom tool from many years ago, and the zoom tool that I like to use is without the scrubby zoom. Take the zoom tool, click and drag over what it is that you want to see full size on your screen, and let go. Of course, once you zoom in really large, keyboard shortcuts to get back, double click on your zoom tool is going to fit everything back to actual size. Double click on the Hand tool is going to fit everything back to the window. Very common across all the Adobe applications. Now, working with our Layers panel, I'm going to go back to my Move tool because it's the one and only tool that I need. My layers are all stacked up here, and the layer order certainly does matter. What is on top of my Layers panel is going to be on top of everything in my document. So my plate's clearly on the bottom, followed by my bread, lettuce, tomato, onion, and bacon. With Photoshop, when you want to do something, you must select this layer. Now, it's not good enough to just go in and turn on and turn off the visibility of a layer in order to be on that layer. If I turn on and turn off my bacon layer and my onion layer is still selected, I'm only going to be moving my onion layer. When you go in and you turn on and turn off a layer, if you want to move that layer or do something with it, turning on and turning off the visibility does not select the layer. If you want to select the layer, you have to click anywhere over here and make sure that layer is active. Just because I turn it off by poking it in the eye does not mean that my layer is deselected. It just simply means that it's off. Can I move a layer that is not visible? Yes, I can. And I can also do stuff to that layer even though it isn't visible. So that's something that you're definitely going to have to get used to, because I still move the wrong layer because I turn it off and I get going quickly and I forget that it's still selected. So turning it on and turning it off only turns off the visibility. You have to select the layer, okay? What I want to do is I want to begin to build my layer composition here. So I've got all of my content in, and what I'd like to do is start one by one in my layers panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off each and every layer here. I could go in and click and poke each one in the eye to turn that layer off. But I have what's called the poke and swipe. And the poke and swipe is you click and hold on the layer visibility, and with your mouse button held down, just simply swipe over everything. So click and hold, swipe to turn off, click and hold, swipe to turn on. That's called the poke and swipe. Now, because I've turned off all my layers, you'll notice that my onion layer is still selected. Just because I turned them off doesn't mean it pays attention to what is and isn't selected. Now I'm going to click on my bread layer. Make sure I've got that selected. I'm going to move my bread all around. Now, I'll need to go in and I'll need to rotate and size this content into the positions that I'd like. So with my bread layer selected, I'm going to go under the Edit menu. I'm going to choose Transform, and under Transform, Scale, Rotate, Skew, Perspective, Shave, Pluck, Moisturize, Spindle, Fold, Mutilate, Whip, Flip, Rub Down. You know the drill. Okay? So if I'd like to scale something, I go under Edit, Free Transform, and Scale. I get a bounding box around my bread, and I can go in and I can scale. Now, if you've used Photoshop before, one of the things that Photoshop did a few versions ago was they did away with the ability of holding down Shift to constrain while you're going in scaling something. Shift to constrain has been in Photoshop for generations, as well as all the other Adobe software. Well, in last version, they decided to take the Shift out, and you go into constrain mode without holding the Shift key down. So what happens is, if you want to set that preference so that you always have to hold down Shift right here, it's a really obscure thing. What you do is when you're in Transform, you go up into your control bar right here, and what you do is you go ahead and you click on this little chain right here that says constrain the aspect ratio. Okay? When you do this, that makes sure that you don't have to use Shift. So if you do that, and I do this, no matter what I do, I can't pull this to be the wrong size. Okay? I keep that unchecked so that I always have to remember Shift constrains. So with that button unchecked, and it may be checked by default, that means that Shift will be required to keep this in proportion, just like all the other applications. So as I scale this, I hold down my Shift key, and I can scale this larger and smaller as I go. And once I get this bread to be the size that I want by holding down my Shift key and making sure that it's the right size, I can also move by Transform any way that I want to by clicking inside and moving it around while I'm in the middle of transforming. When I'm done, I have to set my transformation. Common problem, people think that once they're done sizing, they're finished. No, you're not. That's only half the thing. Up in your options bar, you either accept or you cancel, which is going to be Enter or Escape, or just simply hit the Enter key or Escape wherever you are, or double-click inside to set your transformation. Once I get my bread in place, I'd like to go in and do my lettuce. So I'm going to click on my lettuce layer, and I'm going to go ahead and poke it in the eye to turn it on. You have to do both. Once I get that lettuce, I'm going to move it around to make sure I'm actually working on that layer instead of some other layer. And I'm going to do a transform here. But going under the Edit menu to choose Transform every single time is a real pain, which is why we have Free Transform. And Free Transform and Transform are the same thing. Transform, Command-T. I'm just going to use Command-T from now on. Transform. There's my bounding box. I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and I'm going to scale my lettuce down. I'm going to move it over. But you know what? I'd like to have this lettuce scale from the middle and not have to keep scaling from the corners and going back and forth. So if you hold down the Option or the Alt key and you scale, that's going to allow you to scale from the middle. Now, I don't have to just scale while I'm in the middle of Transform. I can also rotate as well by hovering outside any of my corners. You get my little double-ended arrow. Don't touch the corners, just hover slightly outside it, and I can rotate and then go back to the scale function, and I can move and position my lettuce where I'd like it to be. Once I've got that there, I'm going to set it by hitting return or double clicking. Now the lettuce is a bit small, but I can duplicate anything that I want to inside here to fill up my bread with the lettuce. So, multiple different ways to go in and copy a layer. One of the ways that I can do this is I can go over to my layer, right-click on the layer section, and from this drop-down menu, choose Duplicate Layer. It'll ask me what I want to copy, the name of it, where I want it to end up in the same file I'm working with. Then I'm going to click OK. Now it doesn't look like anything has happened, and the reason why is because when it duplicates something, it puts it right on top of itself. So unless you are paying attention to your layers panel, you wouldn't realize that there is another copy of this in here. But it was. It always puts it on top of whatever layer that you had. So now I'm going to move that over here. It isn't uncommon when you use this feature, you have multiple duplicates on top because you don't see something happen in the actual document. I'm not a fan of this only because it does that, and unless you're paying attention to the layer here, you can't see that. The other way of duplicating, go to your cheese grater and choose duplicate from there as well. Or go to your layers menu up here at the very top and duplicate the layer here. Or, one of my favorites, select your layer, hold down your Option key, and you'll notice what happens to your cursor. It goes from the move cursor to the double cursor. Hold down the Option key and Option click and drag. When that copies, copy always puts it on a new layer. Always. I could also copy paste. Copy, paste. And paste is going to paste it directly in the middle of my document. So multiple different ways to go ahead and do this. One more way to do it, just to add to the fun right here, it is this one. Layer, new layer via copy, Command J. Command J is basically like a copy and paste, except it does it all in one keyboard shortcut, Command J. Command J duplicates it right in its place as well, and now we've got multiple lead-eye here. Okay, lots going on. Now you can see very quickly we will get a crowded layers panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this together into a layer set or a group. And the way I do this is I'm going to select my topmost layer, hold down Shift, select the bottommost layer, and I'm going to group these all together. Go into the layer menu and go down about halfway to group the layers. Command G. You're used to grouping things, no different, same shortcut. When I group the layers, it puts it into a layer group or a folder. Let us name this group. You will see why we name all of our content, no matter what. When we have to find it, it makes it easy. So we've grouped that all together. Now I'm going to turn that group off because I would like to go ahead and start to work with my tomato. And the reason why I turn these off is because the composition for me works a lot better when I'm just dealing with my base layer and I'm not working with everything else that's going on in the file. You'll see why. I'm going to click on my tomato layer and I'm going to turn on the visibility. Now the tomato here is very large, but it's also shot very vertical. So I'm going to go and use my Command T for transform, and I'm going to scale this down by holding down my Shift and my Option key to scale it proportionately and to scale it from the middle. Now what I'd like to do is put this in perspective. To call up all my other transform settings, I can always go back under Edit, Transform, and I have all my settings here. But this is too much work to go all the way back to my Edit menu. So I'm going to right-click while I am inside my transform bounding box. Here, I'll be able to get all my options that I would like to have. Perspective sounds like such a tasty option right now, but I'm not going to use perspective. And the reason why is because perspective is great if our vanishing point is straight ahead. So, if I do choose perspective, and I pull on my pull handles, you're going to see that it's going to give me equal perspective with whatever I pull. Now, the problem with this is the bread is going off to the right, and this is giving me my perspective that's going to be dead ahead, so I don't like this, okay? So one way, if we do something we don't like, we can always hit the escape key and get us out of our transform. This is going to return it back to its original state, and we will lose any of our transformations, which is fine because I didn't want to go that direction anyway. Command T is going to bring up the transform bounding box again. I'm going to right-click inside this, and I can choose whatever I want to do here in order to get this to fit to my bread. In this case, I'm going to choose Distort. And what Distort is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to match the perspective of the bread and get my tomato into that perspective so that it will lay flat and match the bread. Now, in some cases, things look worse before they look better. This is one of these cases. I'm going to drag my transform handles, and I'm going to match the edges of my transform bounding box to basically parallel the sides of the bread. Now, of course, this makes for a super thin tomato, so thin you can only see that it's like 1 pixel thick. Now, I don't have to set this transformation. If I'd like to do anything else, I can always right-click inside, and I can perform multiple transformations while I'm in free transform. I'd like to now scale this down. So I choose Scale, hold down my Shift key to constrain, and once I get my tomato to the size, proportion, scale, and perspective that I'd like, then I'm going to click Return and set that. I would like to duplicate this very quickly. Hold down my Option key, Option click and drag, and duplicate many tomatoes as I go. Now I'm going to put all of these in a group as well, just like I did with my lettuce. Click on the topmost layer, hold down the Shift key, click on the bottommost layer, and I would like to group these together. Another way of group is to go to the cheese grater, and I'm going to choose New Group from Layers. New Group just gives me a new folder. New Group from Layers says, take what you have selected and put those into a group. So once I do that, then I get my group, and I'm going to name that my tomato group. You'll see why I always put the group in a group here very shortly. I'm going to turn off that visibility right there. I'm going to go to my onion, and I'm going to perform the exact same task. I'm going to move that onion in position, Command T for transform, right-click to call up my transform menu. I'm going to choose Distort, and I don't need to pull these handles all the way to the edge of my bread. All I need to do is just make those edges parallel to my bread so that the perspective matches. Okay, something along the lines of that. I can move this over while clicking inside, right-click to scale or rotate, hold down my Shift key to constrain, double-click inside or hit Return, and I set my onions. Duplicate this, Option click and drag, just keep your Option key held down, and simply click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. Group these all together, click on the first one of the list, hold down the Shift key, click on the last one of the list, and I'm going to use my newfound shortcut, Command G, to group. Double-click on the name of the group, name it what it is, all good to go. I'm going to turn off that group. Lastly, I've got my bacon. With the bacon, I need to transform this, Command T for transform. Oh, look, I forgot to select my bacon. My transform comes up. Can I transform another layer without it being visible? I sure can. Let's hit Escape. Now let's select the bacon. Now I'll do my Command T for transform. Hold down the Option and Shift to scale it from the middle. Right-click inside and choose Distort so that I can then distort the bacon. And bacon always has to hang off the sandwich. It is a given rule of sandwich making. If it doesn't hang off the sandwich, you're not doing bacon correctly. There we go. Now let's go back in and see everything by doing the poke and swipe on the visibility. There's our sandwich. Okay? Now it's looking pretty good, but we need to get this bread up on top of my layer. So I could go here into this bread layer and do a Command J and duplicate it, but then I have to bring this all the way up in my layers panel. So when I'm moving layers here, I can duplicate my bread. I just use the Command J to duplicate that bread layer. Got to select that layer first and then do Command J. And I'm going to drag this up. As I drag this up, you'll see those thin blue lines. If I stop here, my bread's going to end up inside my lettuce group, because you can see that blue box going around. Once I see that blue double line, that's going to tell me that it's going to go between those layers and not in. That's in, that's between, that's in, that's between, and that is all the way above. Now, when I put this in, I can now move this bread so that I have that done like that. Are there shortcuts to move these layers? Yes, there are. Under the layer menu, we can go in and we can see how to go ahead and move these layers. So go under Layers, go under Arrange. If you're used to using other Adobe applications, these shortcuts are the same. Send backward is going to be Command left bracket, send it back, Shift Command. So how this works, if I want to send this backwards, I do my Command left bracket, and it's going to send it backward one layer at a time. Okay? Command right bracket is going to bring that up one layer at a time. If that layer is on the top of my layers panel, it is on top of absolutely everything. If I'd like to send this to the back, it's Shift Command left bracket to send it all the way to the back, Shift Command right bracket to send it all the way to the front. Now you may notice that when we send this to the back, it doesn't send it behind the plate. That's because of this thing called the background layer, which we're definitely going to talk about, because it's going to be something that comes up all the time. So Shift Command right bracket brings it all the way to the front. Now what's interesting is that we can move our layers up and down. And another little shortcut that goes along with this as well is what happens if I'd like to select the layer underneath here without stopping and selecting the layer underneath. Well, if you want to select the layer underneath, I'm going to use Option left bracket, which allows me to go and select the layer or the group down beneath. Okay? So Command right bracket brings it up, Command left bracket sends it down, but Option right and left bracket will allow me to select the layer below, Option left bracket, or select the layer up above, Option right bracket. So cool shortcuts here. So here is my layered sandwich. Everything looks awesome. And I'm going to make sure I save. Okay? Fantastic. There we go. So I've saved my layer sandwich and everything is looking pretty good. But now what I'd like to do is I would like to begin to move some of these little bits and pieces around to get them to hang out. And I notice that I have my little piece of lettuce over here, and I'd like to just pull that out a little bit more. And remember that tomato that we put right here? I want to pull that out to the side here. But I can't see that tomato. And how do I know which piece of lettuce there is here? So it isn't uncommon that people will go into the lettuce here, and then they'll go in and they'll poke each one in the eye until they see which piece of lettuce it is, and then go in and do this and move that lettuce and then close that back up. You can. It just takes a lot of time. What about this tomato that was right here? Well, in order to see that tomato, I have to shut off my bread and shut off my bacon and shut off my onion, and then go into my tomato group and then poke each one in the eye to find out which one it is. And it's a complete waste of time. So there it is. I find that. I take that tomato and I move it. And then I turn everything back on to see if I've moved that far enough, and I haven't. So now I got to go back. Too much time. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to use the auto select feature. And I love the auto select feature. Now there's two different types of selections that we can go ahead and do with the move tool. And one of them is finding objects that are hidden in the file. If I ever wanted to get this tomato right here, I'm going to go to where I think the tomato is, and I'm going to right-click on my sandwich. When I right-click, you'll notice that I get a list of items. Okay? Any item that is to the left here is going to be an actual layer. Any item here, this is the reason why I call it a group, this is my main group, which means I can select the entire group and move it and transform it at once. But this is the actual layer inside the group, and you'll notice it's shifted to the right. So if I select the entire group here just by right-clicking, and then I move it all around, you'll notice that all my tomatoes move. Okay? Don't want that. But if I right-click, I can get into my group, and because this is offset to the right, I can select just that tomato. And when I do that, it will open up my group, bring me right to that, select that layer, and then allow me to move this without moving everything out of the way, which is really nice. Now I have to go and collapse this group again. Now we do have this cool feature down here as we can go back into our layer cheese grater. I can say collapse all the groups, which is a great way to close up once you open up your groups here. It's a quick and easy way of doing it. Nice feature. So now I could go in and right click and I could find that onion, and I don't see any onions there because there may not have been an onion right in this place. There's my onion, and I can take that and I can select that and I can move that out a little bit to begin to see a little bit more of what's going on with my sandwich. And I can close up that twirly again and close up my onion group. Now, if I want to do everything to a group here, I'm going to turn off these layers here. If I'd like to transform this entire group or move it all together, if I select the group, I can move it, but I can also do a Command T for transform as well, and do everything in the group at once just by selecting the group or opening that up and individually selecting each one of the layers. Poke and swipe, turn the layers back on. So now I'm able to go through and right click on anything and get back into what I'm looking for. This is a great feature. This is also the reason why you name all your layers, okay? So that you know exactly what things are. You know this is a group, you know this is a layer, good to go. Let's jump back up to the options bar, and we're going to talk about some of the features that the Move tool has. This fantastic feature called Auto Select, which allows us to auto select when we click on anything. But it's not just anything. Do you want to auto select a layer, or do you want to select the entire group? Well, I'm going to choose Auto Select Layer, and how the Auto Select works is very simple. Whatever you click on, it auto selects. So if I click on this onion, it automatically selects that. If I click on the bacon, if it clicks on the bread. Now, what I don't like about this feature is if I right click on something and say, oh, I want to get to this hidden onion right here, this piece of lettuce, and there it is, and I try to move that with the auto select turned on. Once I click to move that piece of lettuce, I click the auto select and it automatically selects my bread. So I don't like that feature being turned on. So I'm going to turn that feature off by clicking the auto select checkbox off. But I do love the auto select feature. And that auto select feature can be had by holding down your command key. Now what's interesting is that, watch that, okay? If I hold down my command key, you see how the auto select will turn on. Just like the space bar gives me my hand tool for as long as I hold down the space bar. If I hold down my command key, that move tool will turn into auto select whenever I need to. Now, what's cool about this is that when I do hold down my command key and I hover over something, I get the little bounding box around that object to show me that I'm kind of like in the right location. So if I hold down that, it shows me that this is my little onion right there, or this is my bread, or this is my bread right here. So all I'm doing is holding down the command key and getting these smart guides and showing me what's going on. So if I wanted this piece of lettuce, I would hold down the command key to get the auto select, click, it selects that lettuce, let go of my command key, and I've auto selected that. And now I can click and move that without fear of clicking on something else and auto selecting that. So make sure you have that set. When you do go in here, make sure that this is set to layer, okay? Because even with the auto select turned off, when you temporarily auto select by holding your command key, it will select whatever you have chosen right here. Now the other thing with the Move tool is the Show Transform controls. Some people like to have this on, and the Show Transform controls just simply means when you go in and select something, the transform controls will show up automatically, the Command T, okay? Some people like this so they can see what's going on and move it and transform, and this just allows you to do your transform without having to enter into transform mode, okay? But even if you do show the transform controls and you do change something here, you still have to set your transformation by hitting your return key. Okay? Now it doesn't look like it changed, So whenever I click on something right here, there's my show transform controls. I change that size. I have to set that, but then the transform controls don't go away, which could be a little bit confusing. But that is something that you can turn on and turn off, so you see that bounding box around your objects all the time. Okay? It's a choice. All right? But if you have them on all the time, that transform doesn't go away when you hit return after you transform something. So keep those things in mind when you're using the Move tool. Very helpful stuff. Okay, so what I want to talk about now is being able to duplicate layers when we're dealing with our layers panel here. Now, one of the things that I had done was I'm going to delete my bread layer, and here's a quick way to delete something. Click on it, just hit your delete key. Don't hold the delete key down very much, because you hold it down for a split second, and all of a sudden everything goes away just like that. Thank goodness for Photoshop, multiple undos. Command Z is going to allow you to undo everything. If I wanted to duplicate a layer, but I would like to duplicate this layer not on my document, but in my layers panel, I can. I'm going to select my top bread layer and delete it. I wanted to get this piece of bread to be on the top of my document. I don't have to duplicate it here in my document. I can duplicate it right here in my layers. You can copy anything in your layers panel. So here, select the layer, hold down my option key, option click and drag that up to the position that I'd like it in, and then go ahead and move it. And I've just duplicated that layer right there. Super simple. Now, let's talk about our transparency. I'm going to turn off this plate layer. And you'll notice that we see this checkerboard pattern, and we see this on all of these files. And the reason why is because these files had the background taken out. So we get to our plate right here, and if we wanted to put a tablecloth or put this on a table or some type of background here, we would need to take out that white background. The problem is we can't, because this technically is not a layer. And the reason why is because this shows up as a background with a lock. I can't put anything behind this background layer. I cannot transform this. Try my Command T, it doesn't work. I try my Move tool and I try to move my layer and it's locked. I try to do anything with this and I can't do anything with this background layer. In fact, I try to go and get my eraser tool, and when I try to erase something right here, it just simply draws, and it's like, why? Well, the reason why, folks, is this is not a layer, okay? And the reason why it's not a layer is because layers have the ability to be transparent, meaning we can remove pixels and then have no pixels whatsoever to show this transparency grid, which all these files have been done. So what is this background layer, and what are people's belief about the background layer? Well, what's really interesting about the background layer is people think that there's something special about the background layer. There isn't. In fact, when you go in and you shoot a picture, and I'm going to open up a recent one right here, I open this up, oh look, that's a background, okay? It's not really a layer, in fact. Every image that you shoot cannot be shot as a transparent image, because you're always going to capture pixels. So it comes in, and people think that this background layer is special for some reason. It isn't. There's nothing special about a background layer. So some people will go in and they find if they duplicate that by doing a Command J, then they can turn that off and save this for a special occasion. Why, I have no idea. But once this becomes a layer, then if I go in and I erase or I select and I remove the background, it can all go away. Okay? Well, we're going to go in and we're going to turn this into a layer. And it's very difficult to turn this into a layer. You go to that background, you click the unlock button, it now becomes a layer. It can now move, it can now rotate, it can now scale, it can now be deleted, it can be set to transparency. Some people ask, well, I need to turn that back into a background layer. No, you don't. There's nothing special with a background layer. It's more of an annoyance than anything else. Okay? So you can turn this into a layer, it hurts nothing. Turning it back into the background doesn't do any benefit whatsoever at all. So just turn it into a layer if you need to. If you don't need to, you don't need to put anything behind it. You can just leave it the way it is as a background. There's nothing wrong with leaving it. There's nothing wrong with converting it. Once you convert it to a layer, it cannot be turned back into a background. So now that this is a layer, now I can move things around. I can scale this. I can do anything that I want to with it. Okay? So delete the background, erase it, whatever. But it has to be a layer in order to make that work. Now let's talk about some of the layer panel features here. As we go through, I'm going to click on my bread. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to make this somewhat transparent. So in the top of my layers panel, I've got my layer opacity. I can click on the drop-down menu and scale that opacity to make my bread translucent. This is the long way around. I could go in and highlight my number right here and just type in a number and hit return. That's also the long way of doing it. In Photoshop, we get the finger scrubby. Hover over the word, click, and scrub back and forth, and you can get that value that you want instantaneously, which is really nice. An even faster shortcut is select the layer with your Move tool and just simply type in a number. If I type in 6, it automatically goes to 60%. I don't even have to have the opacity slider or the field selected. If I want 75%, layer selected, just type in 7.5. There it is. 0 gives me 100%. If I want 5%, that's 0.5, and so on. Quick and easy way to go ahead and set your layer opacity. If you'd like to lock your layers, we have several different types of locking mechanisms. We've got the lock that simply locks the layers so it cannot be moved or edited or painted or erased. Okay? You lock the layer, turn it on, turn off the lock, right there. We have the ability to lock the position. This will not let me move the object right here, but if I did want to go in and paint on there, I could paint on it. Turn off that lock. This is my edit layer, which doesn't allow me to edit, but if I go to my Move tool, I can move it all around, but I just can't edit that layer. The last one is going to be locking the transparent pixels. And locking the transparent pixels can be really cool. I want to toast this bread, but I want to show you this one trick. I want to turn off all of my other layers right now. I could do the poke and swipe and turn them all off, but I'm going to show you another trick of turning off all your layers. Go to your layer visibility that you'd like to keep on, hold down your Option key and Option click on that eyeball. It will turn off all but that layer. Now I'm going to show you the lock transparent pixels. If I were to go in and I were to toast my bread, and I'm going to pick a darker color here, and I'm going to grab a brush, and with that brush I'm going to take this and I'm going to toast the edge of my bread. You'll notice that it doesn't do a very good job, partly because my brush isn't big enough. There we go. Oh yes, toasted my bread. And you'll notice that I did a really bad job staying within the lines. Okay? So I'm going to undo this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock the transparency. You notice how all of this is transparent? When you lock the transparency, this is just like when you're taping off a wall to make sure that you don't paint beyond the edge. This is the same thing. This is just digital tape, folks. Once you lock the transparency, this allows you to paint whatever you want to on those pixels, but never going beyond those edge. Kind of cool, isn't it? It is. Turn that off. And then to get all these layers back on again, Option click on that same eyeball, and there you go. Why is this Option click so cool? Well, here's something that I love about this Option click to turn things on and off. If you're building a file, and you have a very complex file, which you will have very shortly, and there's certain layers that I've turned on and turned off in my file. If I would like to remember which files I've turned on and turned off, sometimes people will go in and they will color the layer. So they'll turn it off and they'll go to the visibility side of things, right-click in the visibility portion, and change those layers that they had turned off to a different color so that they remember that they turned those off. Because remember, if I do the poke and swipe, that's going to turn off everything, and the poke and swipe will turn on everything. But I've labeled those layers here for no other purpose other than those are the ones that are turned off. Now, I could do this, but this is why I like my option click for the visibility. If I option click a layer, it's going to turn off all of the other layers and just leave me with my one layer that's turned on. If I option click this back on again, it remembers the layers that were not visible. This is why I love that option click, turn on, turn off, because it will remember which ones you've turned on and turned off. The poke and swipe is great, but the option click allows me to remember the visibility of those layers. So again, it's something that I definitely like to have on or in my repertoire to go ahead and use. It's all about the shortcuts, folks, knowing how to use these special tools with whatever it is that you're doing. So now we can control our layer opacity. We can control our layer visibility. We can lock our layers as well. Now I want to talk about going in and working with our layers in kind of a different way. A lot of times people will say, oh, I need to flatten my file. Well, let me just give you a little bit of input about flattening a file. Don't. If you go in and you flatten a file, what flattening a file does is if you flatten the image here, it flattens all this into no layers. And people are like, well, no, I need to flatten my file because I need to save this for the web, or I need to save this as a JPEG. Don't flatten your image. The reason why is if you forget and you save, you're done. There is no getting this back. If you do go into the File menu and you save as, say I want to save this as a JPEG. JPEGs do not allow layers, so we'll automatically flatten it when it saves it as a JPEG, okay? So don't flatten your images here, okay? Other times people are like, well, I want to merge my layers together to go ahead and save space. That also is not a good idea. If you were to merge some layers together, this is what I can do. Different ways that you can merge, and I don't recommend any of them. If I have my bread layer and I merge down, that is going to merge my bread layer with my bacon. Once I do, it puts that all together. If I close and save this file, there is no way I'm getting these back apart. Just doesn't happen. So I'm not going to do that. I can also go in and I can merge all of my visible layers here. So say I wanted to turn off my plate layer and I wanted to merge all of my visible layers together so my layer sandwich becomes one sandwich. Okay? Again, don't do this. If you save and close the file, you will never be able to break these out into layers again. You're done. Okay? But people are like, yeah, but I'd like something that's just this bread layer with my entire sandwich together. So here's the trick, folks. Merge down is Command E. Merge visible is Shift Command E. What I'd like is I'd like the best of both worlds. I would love to have this layer sandwich merged together so that it's one sandwich without all these layers, but I still want all my other layers. So what I'm going to do, which they don't tell you here, is go in and hold down the Option key. So if I want to merge the visible layers together and copy, because remember what Option does, Option duplicates, I'm going to select my topmost layer. I'm going to use the Shift Command E along with Option. Okay? They don't tell you this, but this is what you do. So there's my topmost layer, Shift, Option, Command E. What I've just done is I've just merged all of my visible layers together. Here's all my layers. There is my merged layer. I'm going to delete this and turn off the plate here because the Shift, Option, Command E will merge all of my visible layers together. Visible layers, okay? There's my topmost layer. Shift, Option, Command E. There's my layer sandwich. Guess what? It's all one layer, and I still have all my layers. Now if I accidentally save and close the file, you know what I've done? Nothing. I still have my original layers. If you want something to do and merge your images layers together, always use the Shift, Option, Command E. Smart way of doing it, will never come back and bite you. Okay? Great way to have that feature. Super wonderful. Did I tell you how much I like it? There you go. Okay? So, Remember, Shift Option Command E is going to merge all of your visible, and it will put it on top of your selected layer. Now, talking about selected layers here, we can go in and we can create a blank layer if we wanted to do something in our file. Say we wanted to fill it with a color, or put something on there, or create something on an existing layer. The plus is going to give us a new layer. A new layer will always come in on top of the layer that we have selected in our Layers panel. If we would like to create a layer below the layer that we have selected, we can hold down the Command key and Command-click on the new layer, and that is going to give us a layer underneath that file. So it gives us the layer, there it is, and it's all good. So we can add these layers any location that we want to. Now, a few other things here in the Layers panel as we go in through this. Again, we can create a new layer here by going in and creating a new layer, or clicking on the layer button right there. A few other things that we have in here as well. This is where we can lock a layer, but we can do that using our little lock mechanisms as well. And a few other little things that we'll get to as we go through our Layers panel. So this pretty much sums up everything that we do with our layers right here. Now, a couple other methods that we use for the Layers panel here, and this is something that I don't use very often, but if you ever did want to use this, one of the things you could do up here at the top of the Layers panel is you can go ahead and filter your Layers panel by kind, or by name, or effect, or mode, or attribute, or color. And what that allows you to do is filter these items so only show the pictures, only show adjustment layers, only show type layers, only show vector layers, or only show smart objects. And sometimes people will get in here and they'll press one of these, and then they won't be able to see everything in their layers. So this is not something that I use very often either. The normal drop-down menu here is all of our different blending modes. For now, we want to keep our blending modes on normal, or else weird stuff is going to happen, I can tell you, okay? And for those of you who use opacity and fill, we're going to find out what fill actually is, and it's not the same as opacity. And it's the $64,000 question. What is opacity and what is fill? They both seem to do the same thing here, okay? But what is it and what do they actually do? Curious if anybody actually knows what that is, okay? Setting the opacity here, of course, you can just simply type in the number. If you want to set the fill because you knew what you were doing with the fill, that is Shift plus the number. So Shift is going to get you to your fill, and just the normal number is going to get you to your opacity. Little shortcuts right there. So overall, folks, we were able to get through our Layers panel pretty easily, understand what we have here in our Layers panel, to be able to move things around, to be able to duplicate things internally here, be able to delete, to be able to reorder our items here, turn things on, turn things off, find things by right-clicking, using our auto select feature, move things around with the space bar and the hand tool, zoom into things so that we can see things, okay, zoom back out, fit everything to the window. And this is pretty much what we have with our Layers panel. That should be a pretty good start for you to get a sense of what we need to do in order to begin compositing our images in Photoshop.